Let me tell you about someone. He failed his university entrance exam. Twice. He couldn't get a job at a university after graduating. He was so frustrated with himself that he once wrote in a letter that he was a burden on his family. He genuinely believed he wasn't smart enough to succeed in his field. That man was Albert Einstein. Now here's the wild part. At the same time Einstein was doubting himself, the people around him could clearly see something extraordinary in him. His professors remembered him. His peers respected him. They saw it, he didn't, and I want to ask you something right now. Have you ever been that person? Have you ever looked at someone else and thought, wow, they're so sharp, so insightful, while quietly assuming that you are just average, just getting by? Because today, we're talking about one of the most fascinating blind spots in human psychology, the idea that the most intelligent people are often the least able to recognize that intelligence in themselves, while they can spot it clearly in everyone around them. And by the end of this video, you might just realize that this has been happening to you too. Let's get into it. Before we continue, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Chapter 1. The telescope without a mirror. Picture this. You're handed the most powerful telescope ever built. You can see galaxies millions of light years away, stars being born, planets orbiting distant suns, crystal clear. But there's one thing this telescope cannot do. It cannot turn around and look at itself. That is exactly what intelligence is like for a lot of people. Think about it. When you observe someone else, you're watching them from the outside. You see how they talk, how they solve problems, how they connect ideas nobody else thought to connect. And your brain goes, yeah, that person is sharp. But when you evaluate yourself, you're trapped inside your own head. You don't hear yourself the way others hear you. You don't see yourself the way others see you. All you have access to is your own internal experience, and your internal experience is full of doubt, second guessing, and the memory of every time you got something wrong. So the question is, why does intelligence make this problem worse? Why is it that the smarter you are, the harder it gets to see your own intelligence clearly? And the answer is actually pretty simple when you understand it. Chapter 2. The more you know, the less you feel you know. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. When someone has limited knowledge in a subject, they tend to feel pretty confident. They don't know what they don't know, so they walk around comfortable, certain, sure of themselves. But when someone has deep knowledge in a subject, something strange happens. They start to see just how vast the field really is. They see all the gaps, all the questions still unanswered, all the complexity they haven't mastered yet. And instead of feeling smarter, they feel smaller. Have you ever noticed this in yourself? You start learning something, and at the beginning, you feel like you're making great progress. But the deeper you go, the more you realize how much is left to learn. And suddenly you feel less capable than when you started. This isn't a flaw. This is actually a sign of growth. But the problem is, it feels like inadequacy. And when it feels like inadequacy, your brain convinces you that you're not that smart. Meanwhile, someone with half your knowledge is walking around feeling twice as confident. That's the cruel irony. Knowing more can actually make you feel like you know less. Chapter 3. Comparing yourself to the wrong people. Now, here's the second reason this happens, and this one is really important. Think about the people you compare yourself to. An average person in any field tends to compare themselves to other average people. They look around their immediate circle and measure themselves against that. So they tend to feel pretty okay about where they stand. But a genuinely intelligent person, they don't compare themselves to the people around them. They compare themselves to the best in the world, to the geniuses, to the people who wrote the textbooks, to the people who changed entire industries. And when you hold yourself to that standard, you're always going to come up short. It's like measuring your running speed against an Olympic champion. It doesn't matter if you're the fastest person in your town. Next to an Olympic champion, you feel slow. So intelligent people are constantly measuring themselves against an impossible benchmark. And then walking away from that comparison thinking, see, I'm not that impressive. But here's what they miss. The very fact that they know those benchmarks exist, that they understand what excellence looks like, that itself is a form of intelligence most people don't have. Most people don't even know what the ceiling looks like. You do. And you think that's a weakness. It's actually a strength. Chapter 4. The internal critic is louder. Okay, let me ask you something. Do you have a voice in your head that critiques you? That notices when you said something awkward? That replays the moment you gave the wrong answer? That quietly tallies all your mistakes? Most people have this voice, but for sharper people, this voice is relentless. Because the same analytical mind that allows you to evaluate other people's thinking, that mind also turns inward. And when it does, it is brutal. It spots every flaw in your reasoning, every gap in your knowledge, every moment you could have done better. And so while you're busy tearing yourself apart internally, someone else watches you from the outside and just sees someone who thinks deeply, speaks clearly, and brings something real to every conversation. They see the output. You're drowning in the process. There's a gap there, a massive gap between how you experience yourself and how others experience you. And most intelligent people never fully close that gap because they're too busy listening to the critic inside to hear the feedback coming from outside. Chapter 5. They can see it in everyone except themselves. Here's where it gets really fascinating to me. Have you ever had a friend come to you with a problem and within 5 minutes you could see the solution so clearly? Like you could see the patterns in their situation that they couldn't see themselves? Have you ever read something someone wrote and thought, okay, this person gets it? You can evaluate other people's intelligence pretty naturally, right? But now flip it around. When's the last time you looked at something you wrote or said and thought, yeah, that was genuinely insightful? Most people can't do it, not because the insight wasn't there, but because when it comes to your own work, your own ideas, your own thinking, you see behind the curtain. You know the effort it took. You know the parts you were unsure about. You know the rough draft that came before the clean version. When you see someone else's output, you just see the final product. You don't see their doubt. You don't see their uncertainty. You just see the result, and you judge it as impressive. When you see your own output, you see everything. The struggle, the uncertainty, the gaps, and you judge it as ordinary. But here's the truth. Everyone is doing the same uncertain, messy internal process. The difference is you only have backstage access to your own performance. Chapter 6. Intelligence turned against itself. We need to talk about imposter syndrome for a second, because this whole thing we've been discussing, not recognizing your own intelligence, feeling like a fraud, waiting to be found out, this has a name, and it is most common in people who are genuinely competent. People who have done very little rarely experience imposter syndrome. They're not worried about being exposed, but the moment someone has real skill, real knowledge, real capability, suddenly they start thinking, what if people find out I don't actually know what I'm doing? Think about that. The feeling of being a fraud is most intense in the people who are least likely to be frauds. It's intelligence turned against itself. Your ability to self-reflect, which is a strength, becomes the very thing that makes you underestimate yourself. And the worst part, the more you achieve, the more the stakes feel, and the louder that imposter voice gets. People who should feel the most confident often feel the most exposed. Chapter 7. The cost of not seeing yourself clearly. Now, I want to get real with you for a second, because this isn't just an interesting psychological concept. This has real consequences for your life. If you can't see your own intelligence, if you consistently underestimate what you bring to the table, what happens? You don't raise your hand when you should. You stay quiet in meetings when your idea is actually the best one in the room. You don't apply for the opportunity because you've already decided you're not qualified. You let someone else, someone who may know far less than you, walk up and take the thing you deserved, simply because they didn't have your doubt. You hold back. Constantly. Not because you're not ready, but because you can't see that you're ready. And over time, that becomes a pattern. A whole life where your potential never fully shows up because you were too busy questioning whether you had any. I don't want that for you. I don't think you want that for yourself either. Chapter 8. What can you actually do about this? So let's talk about what to do with all of this, because knowing the problem is only halfway there. First, start collecting evidence. When someone compliments your thinking, write it down. Not because you need validation, but because your brain is biased against registering positive feedback. You need to physically force it to stick. A compliment disappears in seconds. A written record stays. Second, start separating the process from the product. Yes, your work felt messy and uncertain from the inside. That's fine. That's normal. The question isn't how it felt to make. The question is what came out. Judge your output by the same standard you'd use for someone else. Third, notice when you're comparing to the ceiling. When you catch yourself saying, "I'm not as good as so-and-so," ask yourself, are you comparing yourself to a realistic benchmark or to the top 0.1% of all time? Because if it's the latter, you're not being honest. You're being unfair to yourself. And fourth, get external input actively. Don't wait for feedback to come to you. Ask someone you respect, what do you think I'm actually good at? What do you see in me? Not for ego, for data. Because the people around you have information about you that you don't have about yourself. And last, here's the thing I want you to walk away with today. Intelligence without self-awareness is like a compass with no map. You have something powerful, but if you don't know you have it, if you can't point it in the right direction, it just sits there, unused. The people who changed the world weren't necessarily the smartest people alive. They were the ones who were smart and knew it. Not arrogantly, not with ego, but with enough confidence to act on what they had. Einstein figured it out eventually. He stopped waiting to feel smart enough and started doing the work. And the rest is history. So my question for you is this. What would you do differently if you actually believed in what you had? Think about that. And if this hit close to home, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because the person you're thinking of right now, they probably can't see it in themselves either. I'll see you in the next one.